This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.
Over the years, many Irish missionary sisters have done Trojan work among disadvantaged communities in Africa. This is a few of their stories, the stories of unsung Irish heroines in Africa.
I had a great life in Africa. I enjoyed my life there and I grew a lot. I changed myself. So whatever I did for Africa, Africa did a lot for me.
The Zambian people were lovely. They really were appreciative of everything and they were as happy as Larry.
Oh, it's incredible, really. That's what I feel like. I learned so much from the Ethiopian people. I really did.
While I often feel, yes, maybe I've given a lot, I've also received an awful lot from the people of Uganda and from other countries where I've worked. It's not a one-way traffic, it's both ways.
Well, it was great to be there and be able to help people who really needed help.
You feel driven to do your best to try to alleviate, I think, that suffering, which it is, appalling suffering.
It was having so much myself and feeling that there were others who didn't have and wanting somehow to help. And I suppose you would call it compassion.
The best years of my life were there, and they were good years, really great.
I'm Paul Wright and welcome to the 8th and last programme of Unsung Irish Heroines in Africa. If you ever visit Dundalk town in County Louth, just a few miles from the town is situated a beautiful building called Mount Oliver. It's the Irish headquarters of the Franciscan Missionary Sisters for Africa. In the first part of today's programme, we investigate the life of one Mount Oliver resident. Here she is to introduce herself.
My name is Sister Nora Herbert. I'm a Franciscan Missionary Sister for Africa and I live here in Dundalk. I spent a good part of my life, 24 years, in Africa in 3 different countries. In Zambia first, then in Uganda for a while, and then in South Africa for a term. But I spent most of the time in Zambia, so mostly I knew about Zambia. But when I had finished school, it was September in, I don't know the year now, I can't remember the year, 1954 I suppose. There was a film being shown in the town, and my sisters had told my mother this was coming and they were interested in going. So she asked me would I go, and I said no. I had seen these films before and I'm not interested. So she asked me, would I, for her sake, go and take my sisters. So to please my mother, I went. During that, the film was More Than I Can.
And the film More Than I Can was a missionary film made in 1954 by Kingston Davies to show the life and work of the Franciscan Missionary Sisters for Africa. At the time, it was popular for missionary congregations to make films about their life and work to show as they made their appeals for the missions. Missionary films were shown in parish halls, in schools, in private homes, and anywhere else there was an interest. In the film All That I Can, Mother Kevin, the spiritual driving force behind the Franciscan Missionary Sisters for Africa at the time, makes a direct appeal to viewers to help the missions. So what effect, if any, did the film have on Nora Herbert?
Mother Kevin, her personality, her character struck me very strongly and I never forgot it. So then I went nursing. I went to the Vance course in Cork, 3 years training. Then I spent a year in the Rotunda in Dublin doing midwifery, and then I felt I was ready to go to Africa. So I had an interview then with Mother Benedict in Mount Oliver Convent, Dundalk. So Mother Benedict asked me then, was there any questions I wanted to ask about coming and that. So I said, how long would it be until I go to Africa? I was very interested in going to Africa. So she said 2.5 years. Well, I thought that was an awful long time at that stage, but in actual fact it passed very quickly.
And Nora, what would you have done during these 2.5 years now? What kind of training for your work which you would be doing later on in Africa?
Actually, there was no training. There was no training for Africa. It was spiritual training and practical work. So that was what happened during the 2.5 years. So after the 2.5 years, I made first profession. And a week after that, I was in Africa. I left Ireland in May 1964 and arrived in Africa about 2 days after that. At the airport, when we got out in Livingston Airport, there was a big crowd, and I thought they were all coming to welcome me. But actually what it was when I was returning with Sister Columkill, she had been the novice mistress of the Sisters of St. Francis. So they had come to welcome her back. So that was the greeting was.
And Nora Herbert had this to say about what it was like arriving into Livingston City in Zambia.
Actually, the temperature was lovely. It was like summer here in Ireland, and that was really going into winter in Zambia. There are about 3 months of cold weather, which is welcome from the heat. But I thought the climate was just beautiful. So I spent a week in Livingston, and then I went to the Sisters of the Holy Cross for 3 months training in Africa and how you manage an African situation, because I was to open a clinic and run it myself. There were no other nursing sisters there, so I had to do it myself, which was a shock to me at first, but I thought, well, I will do it. I will try anyway. I came back then to Makunko, which was a new mission. It was only about 2 years old. It had been starting, so there were 2 sisters working, one in the school and one looked after the house, etc. And then they wanted medicine. There were sick people around. There was a boarding school there as well for primary school children. And there was a lot of sickness in the area. And school children are sick sometimes, but often not very sick at all. They just wanted a half an hour out of school, so they would want to go to the clinic. So I got wise to them then, so I made a very ugly kind of cough mixture that I concocted myself. And so I think that cured them.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, you certainly knew how to counteract the sickness in a very effective way. But sister, you would have also been dealing with more serious cases as well. What kind of serious cases now?
Well, some would be midwifery cases, and the woman might have been in labour for 1 or 2 days, and they were used to having their own African medicine. And if that didn't work, then they would call me. So I would go to the village. The Capuchin priests were in the mission also. We had no ambulance, we had no vehicle ourselves. So it would be the priest, the Capuchin priest, Father Raymond, who would take me to the village where the woman was sick or whatever was wrong with her. So I would go with Father Raymond to the village. And then we would take the woman from the village into the General Hospital in Livingston.
And Nora Herbert spent 8 years in total working in the Makunko Mission Clinic, which was situated about 40 miles from Livingston City. However, the next mission clinic that she worked in wasn't half as accessible as Makunko.
The next place I was sent to then was Sioma Mission. Now, Sioma Mission was about 200 or 300 kilometres from Livingston, and the nearest hospital was about 100 kilometres from where we had a mission in Sioma. And the big problem there was the Zambezi River. We lived about 5 minutes walk from the Zambezi River. To get to the hospital in Sinanga from Sioma Mission, you had to cross the Zambezi River. Now, Zambezi, the ferry was in action from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening. But during the night, there was no ferry. So if you had a serious case, you just couldn't cross the river. You just couldn't take the person to a hospital. So you had to wait until morning. So, and especially worrying was if you had a maternity case, in case you'd lose the mother and the baby. So I said my prayers very, very well that time, and I think it increased my faith, because I asked Our Lady to save the mothers. I could manage if a baby died, but I think it would be very difficult if a mother died at my hands.
How many years did you spend in this clinic now, Nora, near the Zambezi River?
This was Sioma Mission, and I spent 11 years there. And we had outpatients department. We had inpatients, mostly children. The men didn't seem to get sick that much. It was mostly wounds and that they had. The women came with their children and they stayed with the children, which was a great relief to us, because they would look after the child, feed the child, look after it well, and call you if there was any danger. So we found that a great help. We would also take it in turns for night calls. We wouldn't be up at night duty all night, but we would have night calls. There would be a staff nurse or a CD helping them, a carer helping them. So we would take it on turns then if there was anything they wanted help about, they would call us, either Sister Margaret or myself.
And Nora had this story to relate concerning her Sioma nursing colleague, Sister Margaret Josephine Boyle, and the pontoon ferries which cross the Zambezi River.
I wasn't at the mission at the time that this incident occurred, but Sister Margaret, one day she was on duty, and a child, 12 or 13 years of age, was brought in. She had been snatched from a crocodile with a very deep wound in her thigh. So Sister Margaret and another helper, Chips was his name, they stitched her wound, because it was too late to take her to Sinanga. The pontoon would have stopped, so they had to work immediately. So that child got better and was able to go home. A few years after that then, this young woman was at the antenatal clinic, and she said to Sister Margaret, "Don't you remember me? Don't you know me?" I said, "No, who are you?" So she told her then who she was. So Sister Margaret was delighted to see her. Crocodiles were rampant in the Zambezi River, and sometimes the children used to like to go and play near the river and or have their shower and bath in the Zambezi River before going to school. And one of them was taken one morning, and a little child playing with her brother was taken.
Oh, so a Clearly, this was really, really dangerous territory if you happened to be in Crocodile area.
Crocodile Alley.
Crocodile Alley, by God. And Nora, you also would have been dealing with a lot of other cases as well, severe cases where people who had severe ailments. What kind of cases are we talking about now?
They would have severe malaria. Malaria, again, was very common there. We got malaria ourselves, but we also took prophylactic every week so that if you did get malaria, it wouldn't be severe. And malaria can be very serious sickness too. If a person gets cerebral malaria, many times they die. But I was lucky during my time in Africa. I never got malaria seriously. I got slight bouts of it, but never serious.
Now, earlier in this programme, prior speaker Nora Herbert shared a story about her Sioma nursing colleague Margaret Josephine Boyle, also a Franciscan missionary sister. After Sioma, Margaret eventually ended up working in a Cheshire home situated in the slum areas of the Kenyan capital of Nairobi.
There's great poverty in one area, and in the other there's great affluence, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of anything, So there's kind of two different communities altogether in Nairobi. And it's a beautiful city, Nairobi. And you see a lot of visitors and tourists and everything. And then you move back into the slum area, and it's exactly the opposite. They're living in great poverty.
Margaret, how long were you working in Nairobi for?
5 years in Nairobi, in Kariobangi, in the slum area. You're surrounded by all the slum area and the houses, the shanty houses, and shortage of water and all that. And you're right in the heart. This first time that we had a convent right in the heart of the slum area, and that was an experience in itself. You had to cope with all the noise that you hear at night, and you're a little bit scary sometimes. But we never threatened her in any way. We managed it all right. Was loved flowers. So when we washed our hands, we kept that water and poured it out on the flowers. We never wasted even a drop of water. There was a pail outside the door ready when you washed your hands in a basin, and you poured it in there, and that kept the flowers. So when you peeped into our little oasis, there was flowers and lovely greenery to be seen. But I wasn't responsible for it. It was another sister who was with green fingers. And people just stood at the gate and looked in and come and see the beautiful flowers here in one part. So it just tells you what you can do with water, even dirty water. We held clinics and we worked with the elderly destitute, and they brought them in, and we cared for them. And if they died, we had to be responsible for burying them. But we cared very well for them, and sometimes it was the Asian community used to give us. We went to the stores and we begged for different fruit and anything that was going out at date or anything like that. They gave it to us, and they helped us and very, very generously.
And here's what Margaret had to say about the many grateful people in the Sioma Mission Clinic that she worked in earlier in her life.
And if you had bread to give to the woman who was in the ward, you see her taking one slice, and she put away the other slice till her little child would come in, and she'd share that with her. She always halved whatever her lunch or whatever she was going to eat, and she'd get a piece of paper and she'd put it into what she had left over. And there was nothing on the plate to scrape away because she had put it away. When the children came in to see her, she gave them this, and you would see them gulping it. Just doesn't matter what it was, potato or anything that you had. They were glad to get it. So no food ever went astray. Nothing was ever thrown away.
Over the last few programmes in this series, we've heard many Irish missionary sisters share their experiences of working among disadvantaged communities in faraway African lands. After hearing their stories, do you think these women are heroic? And however remarkable some of these stories may seem, nevertheless, they represent just a drop in the ocean of the thousands of untold stories of many Irish women who, down the years, gave their lives, their youth, sacrificed everything to help those many needy people who crossed their path. In homage to the many members of this group now gone to their maker, I'm going to leave the last word with missionary sisters Mary Coleman, Hilary Lyons, Miriam Duggan and Maura O'Donoghue, talking about what motivated them to go to Africa.
There was an old sister, Sister Phelim Curley. She was one of our first sisters, and she went out to see. She was her sister Declan and herself, and another sister Kevin. Kevin is dead and Phelim is dead, but Declan is still alive. She's in her 90s. But Phelim was a very quiet, unassuming woman. She went out there. When she went out, she was told the convent was ready. When she went, it wasn't. So she lived with a Lebanese family. And then she moved to a little place in a street called Hardup Street.
In Freetown, in Sierra Leone.
In Bow, Sierra Leone. And then she went from there, she set up the convent, so she built the kitchen first, and then the other house was being built, so she lived there. And then she went out to Pujahan, where we had our second opening, and she worked there. She was a teacher, but she wasn't highly qualified as we would be today. Good background, home economics person. She then worked in Pujahan, and she was two girls came to school the first day. And herself and Sister Pazzi, who was from Kerry, worked, and they built up that school. And then when she was finished with that, she went to a place called Saraba with Sister Hilary. And Hilary, they did operations with a bush lamp. And Hilary tells me that, and in Africa at night there are insects everywhere, and a light attracts the insects, as you know. And she said she taught Phelim how to do a rag and bottle, to give anaesthetic with rag and bottle. And she said she would stand there and she'd never move the lamp. No matter what bit her or what insect went down her neck or into her hair or whatever, she said she never moved, because that would interfere with her work as a surgeon. So she was that kind of person. She started off every place. She went and she did it. She did the sensible thing. She made rules and regulations. She was in charge, and she took charge in a quiet way. She wasn't a domineering woman. Now, she died in my time in Sierra Leone. And she was buried there. She was the first sister to die and is buried. I visited her grave. And I admired her. There was something about her that was so faithful. I often think of her.
But you know, there were two things. One is community. You can do it if you have a group of committed people for the same thing. We were there for the people, and then the people themselves kept us going.
To do things, to be extraordinary, like when I think of the early sisters in Nigeria, they had opportunities, nothing would stop them. They had so much.
It was having so much myself and feeling that there were others who didn't have, and wanting somehow to help. And I suppose you would call it compassion or whatever. And But while I often feel, yes, maybe I've given a lot, I've also received an awful lot from the people of Uganda and from other countries where I've worked. It's not a one-way traffic, it's both ways.
Women in Ireland have been very instrumental in change. It was that the possibilities and looking at people who haven't had the chance and we can give it to them, I think it was to do that.
I've experienced wonderful love and acceptance and great friendship from the Uganda people. So I think, and their faith as well, and the things that they endure and put up with without complaining, has been a lesson to me as well. I don't think I can ever complain when I see what other people put up with.
People's needs, and I think it's the need that people have when they're in such desperate situations. You can't walk away from it, and you feel driven to do your best to try to alleviate, I think, that suffering, which it is, appalling suffering. Knowing that you can't do everything, sure, but at least you can alleviate it. And I think that's what kept me going.
This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.